So we just read about the beginning, and we know how the story goes from here, the first days of Adam and Eve in the garden. The rabbis of the Talmud consider how Adam was created, taken from the dust of the Adamah, of the earth, which is low and base material. And then our rabbis imagine that for the first 12 hours of creation, Adam was just this form of clay, not yet human. Before God blew breath into this mold, Adam was like a golem. He had no intellectual capacity, no power of speech, no ability to discern right from wrong, and, the rabbis of the Talmud say, no soul. This idea of a human form without a soul has fascinated the Jewish imagination throughout the ages. It thrills and terrifies us all at once. For centuries, the golem has been the subject of mystics and rabbis, storytellers and dreamers. In fact, there's a depiction of a golem in one of our stained glass windows here at Holy Blossom Temple. A canon of dark Jewish folklore tells how curious men would press up against the edge of idolatry by daring to engage in the dangerous act of creating a soulless, lifeless form, all the way down to Frankenstein. In an effort to imitate God, they used Kabbalistic incantations and secret combinations of Hebrew letters to give vitality, not a soul, but vitality alone to a golem. They could never give it a nefesh, never life, never ruach, spirit, never neshama, soul. We have at home a children's library, and there's a section there filled with folktales about the golem. My boys used to love those stories. Here is the most famous story about the golem of Prague, and it's hauntingly told by the master Yiddish writer Yael. He writes, "Great men were once capable of great miracles. When the Jewish ghetto of Prague was being attacked, and they were about to rape the women and burn the children and slaughter the rest, when it seemed that the end had finally come, the great Maharal put aside his Gemara, went into the street, stopped before a heap of clay in front of the house of the Malamed, the house of the school teacher. And from that clay, the Maharal molded an image, and he blew into the nostrils of the golem, and it began to stir. And then the Maharal whispered the four-lettered name of God, the ineffable name, into the ear of the golem. And wouldn't you know it, the golem stood up and walked right out of the ghetto. The rabbi returned to the synagogue when the golem fell upon our enemies, thrashing them with flails, and men would fall on all sides of the golem, and Prague was becoming filled with the dead. And at last, so they say, through Wednesday and Thursday, and now it's already Friday, and the clock is striking 12, and the golem is still busy at his murderous work. "Rabbi," cried the head of the ghetto, "the golem is slaughtering all of Prague. There won't be one single Gentile left to light our Sabbath lights." So the rabbi left his study once more, and he went to the altar and began to sing a psalm, Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat. We sang it this morning. "See how your enemies, O God, see how your enemies shall perish, how all who do evil shall be scattered." And then the golem stopped. It returned to the ghetto, entered the synagogue, and stood waiting before the rabbi for instruction. The rabbi whispered into the golem's ear, and the eyes of the golem closed, and its half-soul that dwelt in it flew away. And it was once more an empty vessel, a mere golem of clay. To this day, Peretz writes, the golem lies hidden in the attic of that great synagogue of Prague. It's covered with cobwebs now. They extend from wall to wall. No living creature can look at it, particularly not a pregnant woman, Peretz says. No one may even touch the cobwebs, for whoever touches them will die in an instant. Even the elders of the community no longer remember the golem when it walked among them. Though the wise man named Tzvi, the grandson of the great Maharal, ponders a question. What is the question of the Maharal's grandson? He asks, may such a golem be counted in a minyan? The golem, you see, has not been forgotten. It is still there. But the unpronounceable name of God by which it could be called to life again, in a day when we may need it again, heaven forbid, that name has disappeared. So the golem still rests in the attic, but God's name, how to pronounce God's name, is lost forever. And so the cobwebs grow, and no one may touch them. What are we to do? That is how the haunting story of the golem, written by Peretz, ends. Why are there so many stories of the golem? Why so many throughout Jewish history? Because throughout our many fearful chapters, we turn to God on high and we pray with all our might for protection, but we couldn't help from time to time also to fantasize about a hired thug who could protect us here on earth, here and now. Now, God is the true creator, the one and only creator who knows how to blow divine breath into Adam and give him a true living soul and make him truly human. Thereby, Adam and Eve had the capacity to make choices. Because of that divine breath, they were able to be responsible for their actions and their inactions. Because they craved knowledge of good and evil, because they ate from the tree of knowledge at the center of the garden, because they wanted to know the difference between right and wrong, because they wanted to tap the God-like potential which is available, implanted in every human being since that day, they took a risk. They risked losing paradise. They risked losing innocence, simplicity. They traded it all in for a more complex world outside the garden, where labor is hard and requires the sweat of our brow, where worries are at every corner and the shadows fall every evening. This is the human experience. To be human means to engage with the world, with the messy world of good and evil, of joy and suffering, of sickness and health. To be human means to be made of flesh and blood, and to be vulnerable. To feel deeply the pleasure and the pain. Not to be callous or indifferent to the pain. Not only to go about our business, working, eating, sleeping, organizing, shifting things around, that's not enough. To be human means to dig down under the surface of things, to read the morning news and to climb into the spaces between the black letters, and also between the black letters of our Torah, and to muster a response. To muster a response to the daily news, to muster a response to every verse of Torah. Not only to have an opinion about these things, but to have a response. Today we are in isolation from one another, as we must be. But God forbid we should become cut off from one another. We may be alone in our homes, those who are privileged enough to have safe homes to live in, to have the ability to have an Amazon delivery or a grocery delivery magically appear at the door. God forbid we should see ourselves as cut off from the world. God forbid we should be lonely. Our parasha also says it is not good for a human being to be alone. Now, I know some sensitive souls who feel so deeply that the chaos of creation threatens to overwhelm them. Turn off the news. Close the door. Close the blinds. Like Adam and Eve, we can find ourselves cowering in the trees now, naked and afraid, vulnerable, exposed, hiding from the world, hiding from God who created us with such high hopes. But the more common risk among us today, the more typical weakness among us today, is that we can become like the golem, a hollow form, a shell of a person who doesn't show humanity, a human being who is detached from humanity is not a full human being. In trying times like these, we have to double down on our humanity and embrace with every ounce of our strength whatever it is that keeps us human and humane. The first century sage Hillel famously taught, "B'makom she'en anashim, hishtadeh lehiot ish." In a place, in a world where it seems there is no humanity, strive to be human. It seems a simple wish for a person to be human, but it is our most profound challenge today. Our parasha wakes us up to the call of humanity. It stirs the living soul, the God-given soul within each of us. That soul might otherwise drift into a lull of a golem-like sleep and slumber. But our parsha comes to rattle the human within us and to bring us to life again, to breathe deeply again, to fill ourselves with the breath of the divine. The voice of Torah today says to us, get out there, get to it, engage with this world, feel with greater empathy and think with greater expansiveness and live with more generosity and with more spiritual courage too. The golem walks alone. It was created by a human being and therefore stands apart from human beings. The Maharal's grandson asked that question and comes to answer it. Does the golem count in the minyan? No. The golem is not counted among the minyan because it is not whole. It cannot be humane. But we, who are made of flesh and blood, we who are vulnerable to a virus, we who were sculpted in God's hands, we do make a minyan. We do count. We are needed for community to be whole. We inspire humanity in one another when we gather, even virtually. When we come together in prayer as we do today, when we come together in sacred study or in distance acts of social responsibility, we nurture the souls within ourselves and within one another. That soul that otherwise would be threatened by loneliness and isolation. The book of Proverbs says it best. Distress shared by the community is in itself half the consolation. So use your imagination and call up all the souls that are gathered together on this Shabbat. All the voices, the sweet voices we heard in Torah today. All the prayers, all the reminders of holy places like this temple. Let these nourish our soul. This is why we have come today, after all. Across the city, across the countries, across the living rooms, across the screens, we have come for consolation and for reminders of our shared humanity, and for the strength to walk back into the world and to face it. We remind one another that we are alive today. We are each created in the image of God, worthy of this God-given life. So let me conclude with this final midrash. This parsha is so rich with material. It's recorded in Midrash Rabbah that Rabbi Yehuda bar Shimon taught back in the Garden of Paradise, while that Adam was laying prone as a golem, not yet being brought to life with God's breath, God decided to bring before that vessel called Adam a parade of the generations, commentators and sages, teachers and rabbis, scribes and leaders of the Jewish communities, the righteous who do daily righteous deeds, all passed before that sculpture called Adam. And as it is written in the book of Psalms, O Adam, when you were still just a golem, your eyes beheld all the righteous whose names were inscribed in your book of creation. But when Adam was in such a useless state, there was nothing he could do to protect all those generations from the evils and vulnerabilities that they would eventually encounter. And so just then God said, now I will blow breath to bring this Adam to life. I will stir a soul within him. And with that one single divine breath, the story of humanity began. Let us on this beautiful Shabbat, and yes, on this fearful Shabbat, let us run with all our might away from the cold and callous, shallow shell of the golem that we are at risk of becoming. Let us instead run with all our might to attach ourselves to one another, to attach ourselves to fellow human beings safely, of course. Attach ourselves to fellow human beings, to fellow congregants, to fellow Jews. Because isolation must never mean spiritual isolation. When we are gathered to make that one great minyan, which is only comprised of human living souls, there we will find strength and hope. There we will find our own humanity. And there we will find our God. Ken Yehi Ratzon.